My name is Jessica Williams, and at 32, I thought I understood the rhythms of Pumice Heights Hospital. As a registered nurse in the cardiac telemetry unit, I'd spent 4 years learning every sound this place made. The soft beep of monitors, the whispered conversations at the nurse's station, the gentle hum of equipment that kept our patients stable through the night. Pumice Heights sits on a hill overlooking Ash Valley, Washington, its windows catching the morning light that filters through the evergreens. It's a mid-sized facility, the kind where everyone knows everyone, where trust runs deep because it has to. In a place where life and death decisions happen every shift, you learn to rely on your colleagues completely. But lately, something felt different. It started with small things. Medication counts that didn't quite add up during shift changes. The way certain staff members seemed unusually tired during what should have been routine days. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the break room, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence that lingered like antiseptic in the air. Sarah Davis, our unit manager, had always been someone I looked up to. She'd been at Pumice Heights for over a decade, working her way up from bedside nursing to administration. When I'd started here fresh out of nursing school, she'd taken me under her wing, teaching me not just the technical aspects of cardiac care, but the softer skills: how to comfort a frightened family member, how to advocate for patients when the system seemed to work against them. Jessica, she told me during my first week, nursing isn't just about following protocols. It's about being present when people need you most. Her office door was always open, her advice always thoughtful. She had the power to approve or deny my schedule requests, and she'd always been fair, working around my continuing education classes and family obligations. But over the past few months, I'd noticed changes. Sarah seemed distracted during our unit meetings, her usually sharp attention to detail becoming scattered. She'd started delegating more responsibilities to the charge nurses, claiming she needed to focus on bigger-picture administrative tasks. The quality improvement initiatives she'd once championed began falling by the wayside. Then there were the unexplained absences. Sarah would disappear for hours at a time, her office empty, her whereabouts unknown to the administrative assistants. When questioned, she'd mention meetings with hospital executives or urgent calls from the state health department. But the timing never quite made sense. Last Tuesday, I'd been looking for her to discuss a patient care concern when I noticed her office light was on, but the door was locked. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement inside, but when I knocked, there was no response. 20 minutes later, she emerged looking flushed and slightly disoriented, claiming she'd been on an important conference call that couldn't be interrupted. The other nurses had started whispering. During report, I'd catch fragments of conversations, concerns about medication discrepancies, questions about Sarah's availability during critical situations, observations about her increasingly erratic behavior. But whenever I tried to join these discussions, they'd shift to safer topics like weekend plans or hospital gossip. Yesterday, everything came to a head. During the evening shift change, we discovered a significant shortage in our controlled substance inventory. The automated dispensing system showed withdrawals that didn't match our patient records. As unit manager, Sarah was responsible for investigating such discrepancies, but when we tried to locate her, she was nowhere to be found. I'd volunteered to stay late and help with the investigation, but the night supervisor told me it would be handled through proper channels. The way she said it, with that careful tone administrators use when they're protecting information, made my stomach tighten with. Now, walking through the hospital corridors at the start of another shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The familiar sounds of Pumice Heights seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The trust I'd built over 4 years felt fragile, like a house of cards waiting for the slightest disturbance. As I approached the cardiac unit, I saw Sarah's office light was already on, though. It was barely 6 in the morning. Through the frosted glass, I could see her silhouette moving in ways that seemed strange, almost furtive. My badge beeped as I swiped into the unit, and I noticed her movement suddenly stop. Something was happening at Pumice Heights Hospital, something that went beyond the usual challenges of healthcare. And I had the growing, uncomfortable certainty that I was about to discover exactly what that something was. The foundation of my trust in Sarah Davis had been built over 3 years of working together. When I'd first arrived at Pumice Heights Hospital as a newly graduated nurse, she'd been the one to take me under her wing. Sarah had shown me how to navigate the complex EPIC system, taught me the unwritten rules of hospital politics, and helped me develop the confidence I needed to advocate for my patients. Jessica, she'd said during my first week, nursing isn't just about clinical skills. It's about building relationships with patients, families, and your colleagues. Trust is everything in this profession. Her words had resonated with me then, and I'd carried them throughout my career. Sarah had the power to approve or deny my schedule requests, and she'd always been fair about accommodating my needs. When my mother had been diagnosed with diabetes 2 years ago, Sarah had immediately adjusted my shifts so I could drive her to appointments. When I'd wanted to pursue my certification in cardiac care, she'd supported my application for educational leave and even written a glowing recommendation letter. "You're one of our strongest nurses," she told me during my last performance review. "I see great things in your future here at Pumice Heights." The sincerity in her voice had made me feel valued, appreciated. I trusted her judgment completely. But over the past few months, small incidents had begun to accumulate like sediment in still water. It started with minor inconsistencies. Sarah being unavailable during critical situations, her explanations for absences becoming increasingly vague. The first time I'd noticed something odd was during a code blue in March. While the rest of us had rushed to respond, Sarah had been notably absent from the resuscitation effort. When I'd asked about it later, she'd claimed she'd been dealing with a family emergency phone call. The pattern continued. During a particularly busy shift in April, when we'd been short-staffed and overwhelmed, Sarah had disappeared for nearly 2 hours. The charge nurse had covered for her, saying she was in meetings with administration, but I'd seen her car still in the parking lot and noticed her office light was off. When she'd returned, her demeanor had seemed different, more relaxed, almost euphoric, which struck me as odd given the chaos we'd been managing. Then there were the medication discrepancies. As a cardiac unit, we maintained strict protocols for controlled substances, particularly pain medications and sedatives. The automated dispensing system required manager-level authorization for certain withdrawals, and Sarah's access codes had been used frequently during times when she wasn't visibly present on the unit. When I'd mentioned this to Jessica Martinez, one of the other nurses, she'd given me a look that suggested she'd noticed the same thing. "I've been wondering about that too," Jessica had whispered during a quiet moment at the nurse's station. "The numbers don't always add up, and when I've tried to ask Sarah about it, she gets defensive. Says it's part of her administrative duties that we don't need to understand." The most troubling incident had occurred just last week. I'd been working a double shift to cover for a colleague who'd called in sick, and around 3 a.m, I'd needed to access Sarah's office to retrieve some patient files. Using my temporary administrative access, I'd unlocked her door and immediately noticed something strange. The office smelled medicinal, almost clinical, but not in the way you'd expect from paperwork and computers. There was an underlying scent that reminded me of the medication preparation areas. On her desk, partially hidden under some reports, I'd glimpsed what looked like empty medication vials. Before I could examine them more closely, I'd heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly grabbing the files I needed, I'd left the office, but the image of those vials had stayed with me. When I tried to rationalize it, perhaps Sarah was conducting some kind of inventory or quality control review. The explanation felt forced, incomplete. The breaking point came during yesterday's shift. We'd had a patient experiencing severe chest pain, and the physician had ordered immediate pain management. When I'd gone to the automated dispensing system to retrieve the prescribed medication, the system showed that the required doses had already been withdrawn under Sarah's authorization code. But the medication wasn't in the patient's room, wasn't documented in the medical record, and Sarah was nowhere to be found. I'd had to contact the pharmacy directly to get replacement medication, causing a dangerous delay in the patient's care. When Sarah had finally appeared an hour later, claiming she'd been in a budget meeting with the CFO, her explanation for the missing medication had been convoluted and defensive. She'd suggested there might be a system error, that she'd investigate it personally, and that I shouldn't mention it to anyone else until she'd had a chance to review the records. "These kinds of discrepancies can look bad for the unit if they're not handled properly," she'd said, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "I need you to trust me on this, Jessica. Let me handle it through the appropriate channels." But trust, I was learning, required more than just history and good intentions. It required consistency, transparency, and accountability, qualities that seemed to be eroding in Sarah's behavior with each passing week. That evening, as I'd been preparing to leave, I'd overheard a conversation between 2 night shift nurses near the elevator. They'd been discussing concerns about medication management and wondering if they should report their observations to the nursing supervisor. When they'd seen me approaching, they'd quickly changed the subject, but their worried expressions had told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed the problems. The difference was that others seemed afraid to speak up, perhaps because of Sarah's position of authority, perhaps because of the professional relationships and loyalties that made accusations feel like betrayals. Walking into the hospital this morning, I'd made a decision. The trust I'd placed in Sarah had been earned through her actions over the years, but it could also be lost the same way. If my suspicions were correct, if she was somehow involved in the medication discrepancies, then my loyalty to her had to be weighed against my responsibility to patient safety and professional integrity. As I had approached her office and seen that strange, furtive movement through the frosted glass, I'd realized that the time for passive observation had passed. Whatever was happening behind that door, whatever was causing the discrepancies and the defensive behavior, I needed to know the truth. The trust between us had been built on the foundation of shared professional values. If those values were being compromised, then the trust itself had become meaningless. And in a profession where lives depended on our integrity, meaningless trust was more dangerous than honest suspicion. Standing outside Sarah's office now, my hand hovering over the door handle, I understood that whatever I discovered in the next few moments would change everything between us forever. I turned the handle and stepped into Sarah's office without knocking. She was hunched over her desk, a small pill bottle in her hands, quickly shoving something into her mouth. When she looked up and saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, then a forced attempt at normalcy. "Jessica, I didn't hear you knock," she said, her voice slightly thick. The pill bottle had disappeared somewhere beneath her desk. "I didn't," I replied, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk." Sarah's eyes were dilated, and there was a slight tremor in her hands as she tried to arrange papers on her desk. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with devastating clarity. The medication discrepancies, the defensive behavior, the schedule manipulations that kept her working alone during certain shifts. It all made sense now. "About what?" she asked, but her voice lacked conviction. "About the Dilaudid that's been going missing from our unit. About why you've been so protective of certain medication counts. About what you just took when I walked in here." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Sarah's professional mask was crumbling, revealing something desperate underneath. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Jessica. The administration, the budget cuts, the constant scrutiny. Sometimes I need something just to get through the day." "So you've been diverting pain medication meant for patients?" The words felt heavy in my mouth. "It's not that simple," Sarah said, standing up abruptly. "I've never taken anything that would have gone to a patient. I'm careful about the counts. I make sure everything balances. By falsifying records? By using your position to cover your tracks?" I could feel my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Sarah moved around her desk, and I could see the slight unsteadiness in her gait. "You have no idea what this job costs. The responsibility, the liability, the constant pressure to do more with less. I've given 20 years to this hospital, and now you're stealing from it." The word hung in the air between us. Sarah's face hardened, and I saw a flash of the authority she'd wielded over me for so many years. "Be very careful, Jessica. You're making serious accusations without proof. Accusations that could destroy careers, including your own." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm reminding you that I have the power to make your life here very difficult. Schedule changes, performance reviews, recommendations for other positions. All of that goes through me." The threat was clear, and for a moment I felt the old instinct to back down, to preserve the relationship that had meant so much to my career. But then I thought about the patients who might have received inadequate pain management because of Sarah's actions, about the other nurses who might be blamed for discrepancies they didn't cause. "I can't pretend I didn't see this," I said. Sarah sat back down heavily in her chair. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to get help, real help, and I want you to come clean about what you've done. And if I don't, then I'll have to report what I've observed to the nursing supervisor and risk management." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think they'll believe you over me? I've been here for 20 years, Jessica. I have relationships, credibility. You're just another staff nurse with a grudge. I'm not the only one who's noticed the problems. Other nurses have been talking, asking questions. It's only a matter of time before someone else connects the dots." For the first time since I'd entered the office, Sarah looked genuinely afraid. "What others?" I didn't answer directly. "This isn't going away, Sarah. The best thing you can do is get ahead of it." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was something different in her expression, a kind of resignation mixed with calculation. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "How much time?" "Give me until the week. I'll figure something out." I wanted to believe that she would do the right thing, that the person who had mentored me and supported my career was still in there somewhere. But I also knew that addiction changed people, made them capable of choices they never would have considered before. Okay, I said. But if nothing changes by Friday, I'm going to have to take this to the next level. As I left her office, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling on my shoulders. I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever happened next, my relationship with Sarah would never be the same. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and worried thoughts. I found myself watching Sarah whenever she was on the unit, looking for signs of impairment, wondering how long this had been going on and how I'd missed it for so long. During my lunch break, I called my friend Diana Martinez, a nurse practitioner who worked in the hospital's employee health program. Without mentioning names or specific details, I asked her about the process for reporting suspected substance abuse among healthcare workers. It's complicated, Diana said. There are legal protections for employees who seek help voluntarily, but if someone is reported for diversion or working under the influence, it becomes a much more serious matter. Why are you asking? Just trying to understand the policies, I said, but I could hear the concern in Diana's voice. Jessica, if you're dealing with something like this, you need to be very careful. Document everything, follow proper channels, and make sure you have support. These situations can get ugly fast. That evening, I went home and spent hours researching the hospital's policies on substance abuse, the state nursing board's procedures for investigating misconduct, and the legal protections available for whistleblowers. The more I read, the more I realized how complex and potentially dangerous the situation had become. The next few days were tense. Sarah seemed to be avoiding me, and when we did interact, there was a strained politeness that felt worse than open hostility. I continued to monitor the medication counts carefully, documenting any discrepancies, but I didn't see any obvious signs of continued diversion. On Thursday afternoon, Diana approached me during my break. "Can we talk privately?" she asked. We found an empty conference room, and Diana closed the door behind us. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. If you're dealing with what I think you're dealing with, you need to know that you're not alone in this." "What do you mean?" "I've had some concerns of my own about certain patterns I've been seeing in employee health visits. Nothing I can prove, but enough to make me wonder. If you have information that could help protect patients and staff, then you have an obligation to share it." I looked at Diana's earnest face and made a decision. "I think Sarah Chen has been diverting pain medication from our unit." Diana's expression didn't change, but I saw her shoulders tense slightly. "What have you observed?" I told her everything, the medication discrepancies, the defensive behavior, what I'd witnessed in Sarah's office. Diana listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. "This is serious, Jessica. You're going to need to make a formal report to risk management and the nursing supervisor. I can help you with that process, but once you start it, there's no going back." "I know," I said, "but I can't keep pretending this isn't happening." "What about Sarah? Have you given her a chance to come voluntarily?" "I told her she had until tomorrow to figure something out." Diana nodded. "That was the right thing to do. But if she doesn't take that opportunity, you'll need to." Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I walked into the hospital. I'd barely slept, running through scenarios in my mind, hoping that Sarah would surprise me by doing the right thing. But when I arrived on the unit, everything seemed normal. Sarah was at her desk, reviewing schedules and answering emails as if nothing had happened. When she saw me, she gave me the same strained smile she'd been wearing all week. At noon, I knocked on her office door. "Come in," she called. "It's Friday," I said simply. Sarah looked up from her computer. "I've been thinking about what you said. I think you're overreacting to some minor administrative issues. There's no need to involve anyone else in this. So you're not going to get help? You're not going to report what's been happening?" "There's nothing to report, Jessica. I think you've misinterpreted some things you've seen." I felt a deep sadness settle in my chest. The person sitting across from me wasn't the mentor who had guided my career and supported my growth. This was someone who had chosen to protect her addiction over her patients, her profession, and even our friendship. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, "but I can't let this continue." Sarah's expression hardened. "I told you to be careful about making accusations you can't prove." "I'm not making accusations. I'm reporting observations and concerns to the appropriate authorities. They can determine what, if anything, needs to be investigated." I left her office and walked directly to the nursing supervisor's office. My hands were shaking as I knocked on the door, but my resolve was firm. Whatever consequences followed, I knew I was doing the right thing. The betrayal was complete, but so was my commitment to the values that had drawn me to nursing in the first place. Some trust, once broken, could never be repaired,